All right, joining me now, very excited. First time for me here on the SI Media Podcast. I don't know what has taken so long. Terrible job by me, but the NFL Draft is coming up, and there is no name more synonymous with the draft than this man, ESPN's Mel Kiper. Mel, how are you?
Jimmy, great to be with you, pal. A lot of stuff to talk about, and not a lot of time to do it, I guess, right?
A lot of stuff. But I want to get into some overall NFL draft, what it's become and your career, and then we'll get into some specifics. But I'm going to start with something totally off the beaten path, because in doing the research, I found something interesting that I need you to clarify. Because you got called out this week by your colleague, Field Yates, for not responding to the group chat. And then I saw that in 2024, actually right about a year ago at this time in 2024, Todd McShay went on Pardon My Take and said, you don't even own a cell phone. So did you just get a cell phone in the last year? I need clarification on all of this.
Todd was inaccurate on that critique. That was not true. No, I have a cell phone. I have Kim's cell phone that I use a lot because those texts come to both of us. And I have my own cell phone that I stash away that I bring to the draft, or when I go out or wherever I go, I'll take that with me. But that's not always sitting next to me. There's no cell phone sitting here. Like there's never a cell phone around me. Never. And
how come? How come?
I don't want to be distracted by it. Nobody needs me that desperately. If they do, Kim's right there. So if there's anything important there, but when I'm working, I'm working. I don't want to have a phone to worry about somebody texting me, or I do worry about emails, because we do, as you know, at ESPN, I get a lot of emails to update us on questions that may be happening that they need answers for a segment we're doing tomorrow or whenever. So the emails I do have to be checking every hour or 2 hours, but texts and calls and cell phones, I have a landline still, Jimmy. So any important calls, if there's an important call, it's coming through the landline.
Okay.
So the text messages, I'll worry about at the end of the day to see which ones are important. But no, on a regular basis, throughout the course of the day, I do not want a cell phone anywhere near me.
See, what's fascinating to me is I would assume you would be one of these guys who's talking to GMs and scouts and college coaches and agents and all that all day long.
No agents. No. I don't do that anymore. I gave that up years ago because it's obviously it can sway you. You can get information, but obviously they're trying to sell their players, and they know that. I used to talk to agents a lot way back in the day. Over the last 10 years, not much at all, hardly any. Some I will call. Like if I still have some good friends that are agents that I will call if I need something, a factual data on a player of theirs or an injury update or something else, I will call them. But I'm not regularly talking to agents at all. I have good friends in the NFL that I've had for years, as you know, Jimmy, that I will talk to, not on a daily basis. Maybe once a month I'll check in. They're busy. I don't like Ernie, of course, he used to always tell me this. Ernie's been a friend of mine since I was 16. And when Ernie's been a general manager in the league, when he was, I'd always say, Ernie, I don't want to bother you. He said, no, you're not bothering me. I know how busy they are, Jimmy. I don't want to call unless I have something important to ask them or get a feeling about a group of players or whatever. Other than that, no. If they call me and they have time and they want to talk, which they do, great. I talked to a couple today. Some of them are retired now, and they're just doing things outside of football, still doing some consulting, this and that. But, I've been around, as you know, 47 years, Jimmy. So, a lot of the great friends I have, some have retired from the game and some are still in the game. But no, I've never, even when I was in my 20s, I didn't call GMs or scouts or personnel people or my contacts in the NFL on a regular basis. I tried to leave them alone as much as I could.
Got it. All right. I appreciate you clear. So, and you've had a cell phone for more than a year. So
I've had a cell phone for going back to the flip phone deals, whatever that was.
Got it.
So now I've always had that available in case of emergency when I'm driving around. If something happens, I can call. But no, it's only for that purpose. It was never to be calling anybody or worrying about getting a call. Right. It can wait. I grew up in an era where we just had the landline, and that was it. And calls came in. We didn't have the answering machines. We didn't have any of that. To me, and I always bring it up, Jimmy, I used to have to call back in the 80s, 90s, before the internet. I used to have to spend 20 hours a week. Think about this, 20 hours a week on the phone calling schools to get basic statistical information that's at your fingertips right now. That allowed me to get relationships with my football contacts at all those schools. That a lot of those guys were friends of mine for 25, 30, 35, 40 years. So without those calls where I was just calling for average per catch of a receiver or sacks for a pass rusher, I found out so much more, a wealth of information I would have never gotten had I not made that call. So yeah, I did spend, like I said, I had a lot, about 20 hours a week just to call all the schools for basic statistical information.
Right. Well, I want to sort of go back to that time, but for the record, I was on your side with the Field Yates thing because the group chat can get out of control. So I don't blame you for not responding.
I don't even know how to respond to it. I wouldn't even know what to. I kind of, and it's not that I'm playing dumb, because sometimes if you play dumb, you don't have to get involved. You say, I don't know. I just don't feel the need to do that. I mean, if somebody needs something from me, call me. I always say, call me. I'm easy to get a hold of. But if you think it's going to be a text or an email chain or a chat group chat or whatever it may be, no, that's not my cup of tea. Yeah. No.
Love it. All right. So let's go back here. 1984 was your first draft with ESPN, which is just remarkable. Tell me, and I know my listeners would get a kick out of this. What was that draft like? Give us a little. First of all, let me ask you this. Was it at Radio City by that time or not?
No, I don't even know where it was because I wasn't there. I was up in Bristol.
Okay.
So I was in Bristol at a table with Chris Berman, Boomer, and Bob Lee was hosting, had a podium set up. He was hosting in Bristol in that studio. And then Chris and I were sitting at a table separately, and Bob was right there. And that was the 1984 draft. And that was the year that Boomer Esiason was in that draft, if you remember, who I grew up watching at Maryland and studied and had my third highest rated player on the board. So think about this, Jimmy. I got Boomer Esiason third on my big board. They have 3 picks the Bengals do in the first round and take Ricky Hundley in the top 10, linebacker out of Arizona, Pete Koch, defensive lineman out of Maryland, with like the 20th pick, and Brian Blados, an offensive tackle out of North Carolina, with like the 28th, 29th pick. No Boomer Esiason. They get into the second round and take Boomer Esiason. We bring Boomer on a phone. They have a little box, and we were talking to Boomer. I'm bringing up Dan Fouts and Johnny Unitas and all the quarterbacks that were overlooked and underrated. Boomer wasn't excited about hearing any of that. He was disappointed. Right. We let that go. We got to like the 3/4 of the way through the second round, and guess what? We left that draft, I believe, to go to like a tractor pull, a speedboat race or something.
Wow.
Now, can you imagine leaving the
That's
NFL
old school
draft?
ESPN. Yep, that's old school.
This is 1984 now. Leaving the NFL draft. There was one building in Bristol then. There was one building. You've been to Bristol. It's a city, right?
Yep.
It was one building. And I remember we went upstairs. Bob Lee and Chris Berman walked me upstairs. They had a driver waiting for me. Took me to Bradley International Airport. Flew back that hour flight back to Baltimore. I got back to Baltimore and I'm checking the draft still going on. Now, you think back, that's amazing. Now we're doing every pick, but to see where it was, Jimmy, and where it has gone to, for me, is like A to Z. It's amazing.
That's what I want to get to that a little bit. Do you remember? Because I remember, I'm one of these people old enough to remember the draft used to be Saturday and Sunday morning and afternoon. 84, was it a Saturday? Do you remember?
It was like a Tuesday, wasn't it? Like a Tuesday.
Wow.
I remember it was Tuesday mornings, and now that I don't remember exactly. I don't even know. I was in Bristol. Then I think I was in Bristol for the first couple of years. Then I remember it might have been 80. No, it was Bristol 84, 85. I believe I went out to California. I was with Roy Firestone on the set of where he did his show to come out to me and Roy, and we did our report on players that year. And I think I went back to Connecticut the next year to do the board with Boomer. I think I was 80. That would have been 86. And then 87 it was either 86 or we went to the main set in New York. So it took 2 or 3 years before we made it, or at least I made it to the main set in New York.
That's what I wanted to ask. I don't know if there was ever a point where you could ever realize the draft would become what it is today in 2025, but was there a moment, did you have something where you said, oh, this is getting to be a really, really big deal. This is getting to be, outside of the Super Bowl, it's like the biggest part of the NFL season. Obviously in 84, you didn't realize it, but was there a point where it really rang to you like, oh, wow, we're into something here?
1989 draft. My wife, Kim, was with me. We weren't married yet. She was with me. And I remember she would bring me shrimp cocktail on the side. And she didn't really have much. She'd bring me a little plate of shrimp cocktail. And that was the year where the Jets, I believe it's Jets don't understand what the draft's all about and whatever. And then I remember it was a response to a player. And I saw that. And then all the media talk about that and the frenzy about that comment about that pick. And that's what I realized in '89, and then fast forward to '94 with Bill Tobin, the late great Bill Tobin, who did a heck of a job in the NFL. Was an outstanding general manager. Buddy Ryan was a good friend of mine. One of my best friends ever in the history of the NFL was Buddy Ryan. Late great Buddy Ryan, and Buddy's family, Rex and Rob and Jim and the family. So great friends, great people. And Buddy defended me that year. And I remember that whole thing. And Freddie Godelli was producing the draft. You know, Freddie.
Wow.
I had
yeah,
of
course, legendary.
I had the helmet phone back in my office on one of the shelves from that draft. And Freddie, after the draft, said, "Take this helmet phone. You're always going to remember this draft," because that was the Bill Tobin draft where who the hell is Mel Kiper? Right, T-shirts made up. Who the hell is Mel Kiper and all that. So that was, I'd say that was 94, right?
Yep.
That was 94, the Trent
that was 94.
Year with Trev Alberts and all that. So I knew 89, 94, it was really a big deal. And then Freddie was involved in this too. I remember sitting day two, it would be the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, was where the draft was during those years. So we would on day two come down. I'd just come down casually and sit there and talk to the reporters who were a lot of friends of mine, talk to some of the people who work in the NFL and whatever, that were all friends, and just write down the picks and just hang out. Freddie was there. I walked down. I never forget it, Jimmy. I walked down and Freddie's sitting there. Why? I said, "Why are you here?" You know, he said, "I'm here, Mel, because next year we're going to televise every pick. And I want to see the layout of what it looked like in day two from the fans and just get a feel for what it was like on day two. Because next year, get ready, we're going to be on the air for every pick." And I think, oh, wow. And I don't remember what year that was, Jimmy. Whatever year that was, when it became we were televising every pick. Then you say, boy, it went from leaving for a tractor pull speedboat race to now being on the air for every pick. So to see it go from what it was to what it is now, for me, I'd say the word I always use is rewarding, because Jimmy, back in the day, I got hated on. Even different family members say, "Why are you got to get a real job. You're wasting your time. Nobody cares about what you're writing about, what you're talking about." Now, at the time, I was doing 25 radio shows a day, Jimmy. 25 radio shows a day. I'm 18, 19 years old. I knew myself what the draft could become. I knew how popular it was. I would do Myron Cope's show and get 30, 50, 100 orders for my draft report. I'd do Martini and Edmonds in Houston and get tons of orders. Okay. I'd do KMOX in St. Louis, whatever it was. I did all Denver with Jim Turner. And, I'd do all these shows, and I'd get, the phone would light up like a Christmas tree. We had 3 or 4 nights, and boom. And so I knew there was a tremendous interest. Late great Myron Cope with the terrible towel, it'd bring me on all the time. And it would never end. So believe me, despite, and I say rewarding because there were a lot of people, even up until the 90s, Jimmy, hating on the draft. And then they had to jump on the bandwagon. They couldn't hate on it. I think I also knew when they couldn't hate on the process and what we were doing anymore, because they knew millions of people cared so much that the haters had to just shut up and either had to go away and not say anything, or just jump on the bandwagon. And that's also when I knew, boy, it's come a long way from the late 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, when every article was hating on me and hating on the draft itself.
What were they hating on you about, these articles back then?
Like, who was he to have a voice? Who was he to have an opinion? He never did this. He never did that. Why are people watching? Why do people care? It's a non-event. You name it, it was criticized. I mean, you name it. And I would even say to my wife, and I'd even say to everybody at ESPN, I don't want to see the good, the bad, the ugly. I don't want to see any of it. Because after I got back from the draft one year, I'd be listening. Why am I going to be? I'm going to the summer and not feeling great because I'm getting killed here, right? I got killed before the draft, after the draft. All the articles were there was no positive article. I mean, I can't say no. There were some, but you don't even remember the good ones. You all remember the bad ones, and there was a ton of them, Jimmy. So I even said after that, I don't want to see it. I don't need that because it affects your mind a little bit, and you don't want to know how many people are saying these horrific things about you, but they were, and the articles are out there. And when it started to cease and when it stopped entirely is when I knew, boy, it's come a long way.
Did you ever confront any of those people who wrote those things?
No, I would. Well, I'll tell you one, and he'll laugh right now. Tony Kornheiser wrote some scathing articles about me. And I remember seeing Tony, because Andy Poland and I worked together. Andy and I were good friends. We worked together. We did ESPN radio down at the ESPN Zone in the late 90s. We started a show we did from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, all year, except during football when we were doing College Game Day on ESPN Radio for 8 hours. But that show with Andy Poland and I, went 9 months out of the year from every Saturday, Sunday. And so Andy and I were friends, and I'd say, Tony, then I got to know Tony through Andy really well. So I got to know Tony. I'd say, Tone, you were killing me. He said, Mel, I was just told to write an article. You were the guy. I ripped you. Yeah, get over it. I said, I can get over it. But I'm saying those were some scathing articles. I just rewrite the same thing every year, and that was it. So, but it was that similar type of thing. And I say, Tony was the only one. I always laughed. I said, Tone, you just were destroying me. I said, geez, who whiz. But he laughed about it. We're good friends now. I didn't know Tony then. He didn't know me, but we became great friends. So there you go.
So he's ripping you in articles, and he's like, "Oh, no big deal. Someone told me to write about you."
Unbelievable. I said, Todd, you were the worst. You were one of the worst. And he said, hey, that's what I was told to do. That's what I did.
Love it. So in '84, were you the only? I mean, I don't even know if this term was a thing back then, but now it is. Draft guru. How many people in '84 were focused solely on the draft back then?
You mean wanting the ESPN telecast or
no? In the country.
Well,
basically.
Joe Bushbaum was great. Joe did a great job. Unfortunately, passed away. Joe was great, and I would see him at the draft when I was the second day hanging out. Joe would be there, and he did a remarkable. He worked for Pro Football Weekly, and he was their draft guy. I remember there were different other people that put out different reports along the way, but. From the TV. And remember, Paul Zimmerman, Dr. Z, Paul.
I was going to ask you about, because I worked closely with him for a few years.
Good friend of a great friend. I remember I showed up to the draft. You'll love it. I showed up to the draft in 1988, maybe. And I walked down, and it was the night before the draft or 2 days before the draft. We get there early. I walked down to where the set was, and Paul was there. And it'd say, geez, Mel, what are you, the leader of a rock band? How long's that hair going to be? Because I had the long hair going. I think it was 88. He's like, he was the one. You're a leader of a rock band? Who the heck? What the heck are you doing here? Paul was great. And then Howard Balzer. I did so much radio over the years. Howard and I did a show together with Kevin Harlan. Howard and I did a show every Sunday night during the football season. And that was great. Lisa Marshall was one of the ones I think it was out in St. Louis, this group out there that produced it. And we did that show for years. Buddy Ryan when he was out of football that one year, did that show with me and Howard and Kevin. So yeah, we had it going during those years. And like I say, that was when you really knew during that particular time that this was something people were following Jimmy all year. It wasn't, it was just a couple months before the draft or a week before the draft. They cared in the summer leading up to the season. I had a lot of people then tell me they cared and had more interest in the NFL draft and the process than they did the NFL season. So I knew when I was hearing that from a lot of people, I had the belief that, and Ernie had told me this. Ernie was trying to hire me in 1983, right before I got the job at ESPN. I had accepted a position with the Baltimore Colts. I accepted it. I was going to go to work that July of '83 with the Baltimore Colts.
What was the role?
I was going to be like an assistant to Ernie, not an assistant general manager. I was only 23 at the time, but to be do whatever Ernie needed me to do. And I accepted it. I was going to give up the reports. I hadn't started at ESPN yet. They didn't probably know who I was. And then Ernie had found out the Colts were probably going to be moving. They had traded John Elway without his knowledge. You remember that whole fiasco, right?
Yep, of course.
So he called me in like June of that summer and said, Mel, I can't bring you in. You're going to be my guy. I'm going to probably be leaving. I said, well, what do you want me to do, Ern? Because I'd already gotten approved by the NFL security. Had already come down and interviewed me and went through the whole process. I was ready to go. That was going to be my last draft report. And then Ernie called me and said that. I said, what do you want me to do, Ernie? He said, just keep doing what you're doing. We didn't announce it yet. We weren't going to announce it until July or August. Keep doing what you're doing. He said, you got a great thing going with the reports. Fans crave that information. You got a heck of a business going. Keep doing it. And I did. And then that was in June or July of that '83. And then in '84, it was January or February of '84, I got the call to go up and interview up in Bristol for the ESPN draft job. I
was just going to ask, so how did it end up where you were at ESPN after that?
Good friend of mine, Greg Murata, was having lunch with Bill Fitz, who was the producer of the draft. Unbeknownst to me, Greg brought up, because Bud Wilkinson was I think retiring after that draft, and they needed an analyst because Bud was a great coach, great broadcaster, right? Remember all the good Chris Schenkel, Bud Wilkinson, the booth. Bud was great, and Bud was retiring and needed somebody to step into that role. And Greg said, hey, there's a guy, a good friend of mine, does this for a living. He puts out a report. He covers these guys. You should talk to him. So Bill Fitz called me. I went up for an interview. I sat in the middle of the room. they like 5 or 6 ESPN were circling around me, asking me questions. Tell me about the offensive line with the Niners. Tell me about the defensive line with the Steelers. Tell me about the front office with the Rams. Answered all those questions for about an hour. Flew back to Baltimore. Had no clue. Got a call from Bill that I was going to be working for ESPN that year, and started that draft. That would have been 1984. And if without Ernie, Jimmy, caring about a 23-year-old kid, I would have never gotten that job. I'd have been with the Colts. I'd have been a Colts probably another 6 months. They'd have let me go because I wasn't Ernie would have been gone. I was Ernie's guy. They'd have cut me loose. I wouldn't have had the ESPN job. I'd have gone back to trying to do the reports again, and I wouldn't have gotten all that publicity that you get from being on ESPN and being part of that draft again. You're putting out reports, you're on the draft. It obviously helps your business, right? I wouldn't have been able to, somebody else would have been doing the NFL draft on ESPN, not me.
Right. Did you ever, obviously it couldn't have worked out better for you, but did you ever have at any point over these 40 years a desire to try to get a front office job or do it even, like Ernie was going to give you that taste? Obviously you don't regret what happened, but because it worked out, but any I wonder what would have happened if I did that, or if I was in that job or anything like that.
Great questions. What I would do every year is I would sit and think, if I were with this team, what would I do for the draft? What would my picks have been? So I always kind of played along with that, like that in that role. And then Ernie I have the letter back in my office from Ernie saying, no, I'd love to hire you now, but you're doing so well with what you're doing. You're not going to leave that for me now. So Ernie, this was even when he became the GM of the Cleveland Browns. Remember, he did a great job there. Built that team with Bernie Kosar. They came within that much of being in the Super Bowl. Remember, John Elway beat him a couple times. And we remember some of the mistakes that the Browns made at the end of games and what have you. But, Ernie had tried or wanted to, he said, because I at least had the letters and we talked all the time during those years. But it's just the timing was right in 83. It was not right in the late 80s, early 90s, because by then I was happy with my position at ESPN and thrilled with that, thrilled to be doing that. And the books I had one book. I had 6 different books. I had newsletters. I had everything going out. So to me at that point, and Ernie had said it, you're staying with what you're doing. And from that point on, no, I was full steam ahead. And now here we are, 47 years later.
So you started in 84. You mentioned couple of draft guys at that time, Joel Bushbaum, Dr. Z. But at some point, and I know you probably don't want to pat yourself on the back, but at some point, Mel Kiper became the draft guy. The draft became synonymous with Mel Kiper at some point. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with the power of ESPN. When do you think that moment was? Do you remember a moment where it was, as ESPN grew, obviously, you were on SportsCenter, you were on all the shows, but at some point you became the draft guy. Was that a moment you remember or noticed, or just happened organically and you didn't think about it?
There was a couple moments, Jimmy. I think even in 84, looking back to that draft, I remember sitting there and I had made a prediction that Greg Bell, running back Notre Dame, would be somebody that maybe the Bills were picking in the middle of the first. The Bills could maybe trade down and still get Greg Bell maybe in the later portion of round 1. I said that like around pick 10 or 12, before the Bills were even up and on the clock. Rudy Martzke, who was a good friend of mine all those years, was a great friend of mine. Rudy was a tremendous supporter of mine. I didn't know Rudy at the time. Rudy didn't know me. Rudy commented on ESPN. They were interviewing Rudy, and he said, boy, Mel Kiper predicted it happened, where the Bills did trade down and did take Greg Bell, running back out of Notre Dame, who had a nice career in the NFL. Rudy commented about, boy, Mel Kiper seemed like he knew what was going on. He's got good insights. So when Rudy made that positive comment about me, that resonated, I think. Yeah. And I will never forget that. I'd always thank Rudy. I said, Rudy, you were the first one ever said anything positive publicly about what I was doing. And outside of the people at ESPN that I was working for, but in the media, Rudy was the first one. And from that point on, we became great friends. We'd talk all the time. And then after that, I think it was 89, like I said, with the whole thing with the Jets. Right. And then the 94 thing with the Colts was another a point in time that's always going to be memorable. And then after that, ESPN's kind of, had footage of all the different things that came up along the way. But it's just been one thing after another after that. But you look back, like I say, even that first draft in 84, Rudy Martzke was right there. And that showed me that people actually were watching and they listened to what you were saying. They took note of it. And when it happened, he said, oh, and then it became, and I always did mock drafts, Jimmy, back in the day. I would even I had a mock draft in 1979, 80, 81, 82, right? Before I came to ESPN, I would always do a mock draft. And then I did a 6-round mock and all this stuff. Now you can't turn your computer on without a million mocks coming up from all over the country, which I love it. Because you imagine all the fans of the draft now, people that are home now that are caring about this, that actually study it and have an opinion that's valued. So there's a million people out there putting out mock drafts. So it's kind of the mock draft frenzy right now. So it's amazing. I wasn't the first one, I don't think, but I was the first one that did a 3-round mock and a 6-round mock. I know that. But, mock drafts now have been kind of the talk of the town.
You could sort of maybe get blamed for unleashing all these mock drafts on us if that's the case, because
there's a little much, Jimmy. Yes,
it's a little much. You mentioned the Bill Tobin incident in '94 a couple of times. I'm just curious. Obviously, you're laughing about it now, and when you look back on it, when Bill Tobin said, "Who the hell is Mel Kiper?" When it happened in '94, were you pissed at Tobin? Did you not care about it? What was the reaction in that moment? Because back then. Now it seems like everybody rips everybody, and it's like part of our business, unfortunately. But back then, it's pretty shocking to have a GM say that about a reporter. So I was curious in that moment what you thought of it.
Well, first of all, I think the fact that he would mention that, I think it showed that he cared, that your opinion mattered. Because I always believed if your opinion doesn't matter and people think you're a joke and you're a clown show, they're not even going to give a daggone what you're saying or doing. So if they do they show respect for what you're doing by criticizing and critiquing what you did. You know what 100%. I mean? So he obviously felt that my opinion resonated and mattered. To somebody, or you just let it go. So
I said this last week just to make the analogy, like LeBron going after Stephen A elevates Stephen A. So at that time, Bill Tobin going after you elevates you. That's how I look at the business.
I agree. I agree 1,000%. I think it certainly did. But I remember it when it happened. Joe Theismann is a good friend of mine. Joe was sitting next to me. We're talking about the next pick. Freddie is in my ear, and the late great Chris Mortensen, who was one of my best friends ever. Chris was interviewing Bill Tobin, and it was off. I remember the monitor was off to the side, and I'm just thinking about the next pick, what's going on. Highlight packages are coming on who's pick, trying to get all your thoughts in order. So, because, Bill was being interviewed by Mort away, it had nothing to do with what we were doing here. And then all of a sudden, Freddie said, we're coming to you after the break, looking at camera 3 and respond. I said, well, what am I responding to, Freddie? He said, Tobin ripped you on the Trev Alberts and the Trent Dilfer deal. And I said, okay. So he said, just respond. So I just came back, looked in the camera and made my comments. And then from that point on, it just, obviously after that draft, you're answering to that whole thing. Then it made Trent Dilfer front and center. Ironically, he comes to Baltimore and wins the Super Bowl, my hometown, born and raised in Baltimore, right? And Trev Alberts didn't pan out and ended up working with me at ESPN. Great guy, worked with me at ESPN. So it came full circle on that. And then Jim Harbaugh, who was part and parcel to that, ended up almost getting to a Super Bowl, came up like a play short with the Indianapolis Colts after it didn't work out great in Chicago. But and it didn't look like it was going to work out great in Indy. Jim resurrected his career, had that great season or two in Indianapolis. And so now, and then Jim, now with John Harbaugh as the coach of my Ravens. So it's amazing how Trent's back in Baltimore winning the Super Bowl. It kind of came full circle. But I think that was something where, and I'll tell you what, Jimmy, it was a couple years after, one of my best calls ever in terms of predicting or just making a decision about what I thought or an opinion was the Rams had taken at that point Lawrence Phillips and Eddie Kennison in the first round. They had 2 picks. I said they should have taken Eddie George and Marvin Harrison. This was prior to the picks being made. We'll go on Eddie George, Marvin Harrison. They took Lawrence Phillips and Eddie Kennison. One of the reporters went to Rich Brooks, who was coaching the Rams, and said, Mel's been really critical. You didn't like your 2 picks. He'd have done this. Rich Brooks said, Mel's entitled to his opinion. We feel we've got 2 good players. He has a right to his opinion. That was it. Nobody ever remembers those two. Those 2 predictions and that analysis was the best I've ever done.
Right.
Nobody remembers it, Jimmy, because it wasn't amplified. Okay. Right. It wasn't brought to light by a comment saying, heck with Kiper, he's an idiot, and everybody's jumping on that. And then you remember that, right?
Sure,
Nobody remembers that because it wasn't, as I said, something that Rich Brooks took issue about. They didn't take issue to what I said. He just let it go, and nobody remembered it.
Did there come a point where you and Tobin came face to face after that, where you had never?
Closest we were at I'd go to Senior Bowl all those years, and I was at Senior Bowl coming out of an elevator, and just out of the corner of my eye, way down the hallway, I saw Bill. He didn't see me. We were 50 yards away. So that was it. No, never was on a plane. I remember I was on a plane with his brother Vince Tobin once, and I walked down. And I remember there were some people around that gave me a little look like, that's him. So it wasn't really positive walking down to get in my seat in the plane, leaving the Senior Bowl that year. But that was the only type of hostility, a problem that people had. But they're just defending the Tobin family, basically. Right. Tobin Vince was always the brother of Bill, and didn't have a favorable opinion of me, and I get that. But no, in terms of ever talking or ever coming in contact with Bill Tobin, no, I never did.
Let me give you a couple of quick ones here, generic overall, and then we can talk about this year's draft a little. Give me you might have just mentioned it, but give me what you thought was your best pick prediction analysis and one you'd like to have back the most.
Well, it's probably the one with the Rams, and you go through over the years. The worst was the Jimmy Clausen, and Jimmy Clausen was the quarterback at Notre Dame. I'm a big Notre Dame fan. People had thought it was crazy, Jimmy, because some thought I had a vendetta against Notre Dame, and some thought I had a problem with Notre Dame because I didn't have Rick Meyer rated high enough, which was a good call, right? Jeff George, absolutely. 84th when he went number 1 was a good call, but Rick Meyer 30th or 33rd when he went number 2 was a good call. But people thought because that, then I had Jimmy Clausen high and they ended up going to second round, was a bust, a disappointment. So that was probably one of my worst calls ever, was the Jimmy Clausen. But I felt good about that because Sam Bradford went number 1, and Sam Bradford didn't pan out to be the quarterback with the injuries that everybody thought. So it was like no harm, no foul, right? It wasn't like the quarterbacks that went ahead of Jimmy Clausen turned out to be anything special anyway. I think Tim Tebow was in that draft as well. So at the end of the day, it wasn't like anybody else was better. That much better. That made me look awful. This quarterback went 1. You had Clausen, and he turned out to be the great quarterback in the NFL. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Fortunately for me, that didn't happen, right? But it was Jimmy Clausen, no question about it. Notre Dame quarterback, I didn't put him high because, and Gary Wishard, who was a great friend of mine, was the agent for Jimmy Clausen. People thought I was shilling for Gary or putting him higher because Gary and I would have battles on the phone, and not friendly battles about players, because all agents did. I would never do that. I would never, put up. First of all, if I don't believe in a player, why would I do that? And no way. And Gary was a good friend of mine. He wouldn't want me to do that. So people all took that as, he was just showing. No. You have your opinion. Agents are obviously talking favorably about their players, which they're paid to do. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about my love for Notre Dame, because I already had Rick Meyer 33rd when he went 3rd. And some people thought I hated Notre Dame, but here's this Polish Catholic kid here in Baltimore loving Notre Dame, and I'm going to be going against Notre Dame or shilling for Notre Dame. It had nothing to do with that. I love Notre Dame. I watch their games over and over again, as I do the Ravens, because that's my team here in Baltimore. So I watch all the other players, but it had nothing to do with the Notre Dame connection or any connection to an agent or my love of Notre Dame. It had nothing to do with that.
And give me for you, it doesn't have to be what turned out to be, for NFL purposes. For you, the most shocking moment when you were on stage working the draft for ESPN.
The passing of picks. I don't remember. It was the early 2000s. And I'll never forget it with Boomer doing the draft, and all those great years with Boomer and him, just being there what's going on? They passed, and then they passed, and then they passed, and the picks being run up, and it ended up being, I think, Kevin Williams they ended up taking. It was a really good pick for the Vikings, but the Vikings kept passing. And I remember Terrell Suggs, they ran it up. Jordan Gross, offensive tackle, they ran it up. They were running picks up just to get him there before the Vikings could make a pick, because they wanted to get their guy in. And Terrell Suggs, Hall of Fame, being one of those guys to the Baltimore Ravens. So I remember that draft of how, I wouldn't say chaotic, but how crazy and how frenzied everything was, and how boom, 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 picks were being made in rapid fire. You never saw that, Jimmy. You just didn't see it. Right. So that was like one for the books, that you sit there and say, wow, I'm seeing something I've never seen before, and I probably will never see again.
Do you like what they've done with the draft, moving it to these venues instead of Radio City? Or it's funny to me when you mentioned, I had forgotten that it used to be at the Marriott. So it went from the Marriott to Radio City. Now we're at these monstrous, cities with team fans in attendance and all that. You like what's going on now, or you understand it's like a made for TV show? And because I sort of like the quaintness of
You know,
the older days. But go ahead.
I did, Jimmy, and I think in New York it was really that homey atmosphere. And with it was not just Jets and Giants. I mean, in New York, you have fans coming from everywhere would come to the draft in New York.
Right, right.
But I think what Roger Goodell and moving it, a stroke of genius, because now they're already probably have signs up in Pittsburgh that the 2026 draft. They have it on the street, all the street corners about the 2026 draft in Pitt. I'm sure they're up there in Pittsburgh right now, right? So because that's where the draft is next year. And certainly in Green Bay, they started talking about it as soon as the draft ended in Detroit the previous year. And when you saw remember Nashville a few years ago? Not a few years, probably been like 5 years, whatever it was. Nashville was unbelievable. Philadelphia was unbelievable. Went to Chicago, were the first two. The first two were Chicago, and we were Dallas, Cleveland, Detroit. We've been all over, but it's been everywhere. But I think Nashville was unbelievable. Last year in Detroit was incredible. It was nice to be in my hotel room and be able to watch the Tigers game like the day before the draft right out of my hotel room. You could see it from the outfield into the Tiger.
Nice perk.
Comerica, yeah. But in terms of what we'll see in Green Bay, right outside Lambeau Field, should be unbelievable because fans come from all over to those venues to watch the draft. And now you're getting millions of people at the draft as opposed to, how many were at the Marriott Marquis Grand Ballroom? Maybe 500. I don't know. But you're getting, I think Nashville, they had almost 1 million people for those 3 days.
Right. Yep.
Maybe even over 1 million. I'm not even sure the numbers, but the numbers keep rising as people keep wanting. It's like, you know what it is? It's like Times Square on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
Everybody comes to, they come to Times Square on New Year's Eve. They come to the NFL draft now in droves. And you could say, when do you know the draft has gotten to the point where everybody cares about it? When I heard what I did back in 84 and even 79, that we care more about the draft than we do about the NFL regular season. But now to see it, and to see the millions of people that are there for an event, Jimmy, that the NFL and Pete Rozelle at the time did not want to have televised. They fought ESPN. They did not want it televised because they thought it would be an embarrassment to the league. Why would you televise something that's a non-event? We're just reading a name. It's a private, they call it the NFL draft meeting is now or a selection process or whatever you want to call it, right? It was like another meeting for the NFL, a selection process. So to televise it was something they didn't want. For ESPN, it gave them that connection to the NFL. Now we're part of the NFL. And you can build on that. So however it worked out, it was great because look what it is now. So I can say the best prediction I ever made, Jimmy, was that the NFL draft would be huge. The one thing, my best prediction was that I believed in it. My enthusiasm never waned. I fought against adversity and hate, and I won out. So of all the predictions I've ever made, good, bad, and different, that was the best prediction.
And if anyone listening wants to see what the NFL draft was like back in those days, ESPN did a phenomenal 30 for 30. It was on Elway and Marino in that draft. And it really, you'll be blown away when you see if you haven't seen it, which I highly recommend, it's a good one. So tell me on April 24th, NFL draft is going to be on ESPN, ABC as always. On that Thursday, that first day of the draft, doing it on TV, what is the most challenging thing about working the draft on that first night in terms of whether it's even stamina, whether it's in terms of keeping up with trades, whether it's doing TV and, getting what you want to get it? What are the challenges of working the draft? Because we watch it on TV and it looks like this smooth sailing thing, but that has to be one of the more difficult events to work in sports television, I would imagine.
I think the anxiety for me has always been hoping your voice doesn't give out. Hoping you don't have a throat issue or a problem, because we're talking so much in the months. And we do this all year. We're doing the First Draft podcast, Field Yates and myself with Greeny. So it's Greeny, Field Yates, and myself doing the First Draft podcast from the end of August all the way through May, basically early May when the draft ends and we do our draft grade show. So we're talking about this twice a week. All year, we're doing these shows, and then obviously you ramp it up in January, February, March, and April. But by the time we get to the draft, as you know, Jimmy, you're doing, back in the day, I was doing 25 radio shows a day, even back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So you're talking so much, and I project so loudly, I guess, that you always wonder in all these years if you're going to have to miss it, or something's going to happen where you just can't do it. You get whatever. So that's always the anxiety. Once it gets there, you're happy. Once you're there and you're doing it, it's like basically you fly by the seat of your pants. We had great producers over the years. You go back, Bill Fitz, John Wildhack, who's now the AD at Syracuse. You think about Freddie Godelli, legend, right? Jay Rothman, legend, phenomenal. Jay was in my ear. Brian Ryder does it now. Rob Adamski does day 3. Is great to work with. All the producers along the way that were able to make this thing go, and the highlight packages. All the guys behind the scenes, the work they do, Jimmy, is amazing. I mean, this is a year-round love affair of the draft, and all they put their blood, sweat, and tears are away from their families. They travel, they cover this stuff, they eat, sleep, and drink it. So the production is so massive that it's pretty incredible. So when you're there, it's unscripted. You have no notes. You know what you thought. And I think and people say about those shows, when I was doing those radio shows, and we would always take callers, and you can't go to your notes. Oh, wait a minute, let me check out. Let me see what I said. You got to just talk. So it gets you going. So on draft day, when it is unscripted, you've already talked about so much. It's like it's right at the tip of your tongue. So you know exactly what you're going to say when you're going to say it, because you've had so much prep by doing all those radio shows and all those TV segments, all the E+ specials, all the SportsCenter specials, all the segments. Everything we've done, podcasts, have been about this. So even back in the day, talking for 25 radio shows a day did help you get to that point. Then once the draft starts, you just go. And you don't know. We get great direction from our producers, like say Brian Ryder, Rob Adamski, and everybody. But it's Mike Greenberg, it's Louis Riddick, it's Booger McFarland, it's Adam Schefter. We're all there doing our draft. Peter Schrager is going to be there, who does a great job. Schrags is phenomenal. So it's everybody. Field Yates has been with me all year. I mean, it's everybody that has that opinion, that voice, and those guys study it as much as anybody. I mean, Louis and Booger are all over it. Fields, unbelievable. Yeah. He's all over it. And Greeny, he's up to probably 150 players studying already. So he's just not hosting it. He's studying it. So I think when you get all those opinions and everybody has plenty of opportunities to talk, because you got a long time on the air, it's a lot of fun, because guess what, Jimmy? You never know what's going to happen. And I hate when people already know. I love to have the mystery. It's like Christmas morning. You know what you're getting. If everybody told you on Christmas Eve, wouldn't be great Christmas morning. You'd rather not know. You want to be surprised. You want to be shocked. People say, Mel, tell me what the shocking first-round pick's going to be. I can't tell you it's going to be shocking. I can't answer that question. Shocking. I can't tell you right now. So I think the mystery and the intrigue and all that. And I always said, this is the one day it brings college football and the NFL together, and it will determine the fate of teams, not only this year, but in years to come. And I knew that back in the day. Back in the day, there was no free agency, no trades. So that was the critical day. It was 17 rounds before it was 12 rounds. Now it's 7 rounds. So I knew how important that day or two was to what that team was going to become. And what I was doing was providing reports on players a lot of fans had never seen, Jimmy. They didn't know their team drafted all these players in a 17, 12-round draft. They didn't have a chance to watch any of these guys, so they needed somebody beyond their own team that was going to talk positively about those guys to give an objective analysis about those players. So I knew my reports had value to fans all across the country and all over the world. We got orders from all over the world that people bought the report. So I knew that. So like I said, I did have faith and confidence, and I knew the importance of the draft. I knew how valuable it was, how critical it was to a team's success or failure, how would it determine success or failure. And I knew all the fans all over the country, whether it was college fans to want to know what their players were like and where they were rated, or NFL teams wanting to know who those guys were once they were drafted. I knew there was going to be tremendous interest in this.
Got it. All right, 2 more here, and then I'll ask you something about this year's draft. You said this is a year-round thing, and you're in this as much as anyone. Is there any downtime at all in the calendar year for Mel Kiper? Do you have any? Is there a month? Are there a couple of weeks where you can shut it off, or there's no shutting it off?
The months you shut it off, I usually use May to finish it up. Worry about where the undrafted free agent is going to go, because that's a good group. These are guys we really study. Yeah, that's the one thing goes on. You spend all this time on all these players, and a lot of them go undrafted. And you want to see, okay, they used to be 7th, they used to be 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th rounders, 16 rounders, 17th round when it was 7th. They were drafted, right? So you think about the Eagles, Seth Joyner, Clyde Simmons back in the day were like 8th, 9th. Mark Clayton was a 10th round pick with the Dolphins, right? Bill Bates was a 12th round pick or undrafted free agent out of Tennessee to the Cowboys. Bottom line is, all those players that you spend all that time on to go undrafted, I want to know where they signed. Right. To me, they're like extra draft choices. Then you hope 3 or 4 of those guys can make your team, or at least a practice squad. So those are important. So you do that in May. You have the draft grade show. You spend May getting ready. What I'll have for Rob Adamski is already probably asking me about the top 10 guys for next year's draft already. So I'll get that list together. Then I'll start getting ready for that, because we come out with that in August. So I use the summer months to get away. Orange Crushes over at St. Michael's or down here on Kent Island. That's my favorite. As many crab cakes or whatever you talk about all over the Kent Island down here. So get away, get out on the boat, enjoy the water, enjoy everything. And so basically mid-May, late May, Memorial Day to June into July. And once training camp opens, it's full steam ahead, Jimmy.
Right. Now, obviously, anyone listening to this or watching this, there's no problem at all with energy and knowledge, but you have been doing it for 40 plus years. Do you ever think, all right, enough is enough, or, I got a couple of more good ones in me, or, let me go enjoy my life and my family, or we're doing this till we can't do this anymore?
It's a great question, because you don't even think about, I guess you think about, I always want to let everybody else have. Field Yates. Well, Todd McShay was it. Field Yates. I wanted Todd. I kept saying, bring Todd, put him on the main set. I never wanted to be the sole voice. I wanted other opinions to be there to counter what I was saying. So Todd came along, was great. Field's phenomenal. Mike Mayock doing what he did on the NFL Network. Daniel Jeremiah. These are all good friends of mine. So Peter Schrager, he's got his opinions, right? Adam Schefter knows these guys inside now too. Not just an insider. He knows these players. So, and he's got great contacts, obviously, throughout the league. It always has. So I think all these people, to bring all these people to this type of an event and have an opportunity to, now we got Jordan Reed, Matt Miller. Matt's great. Jordan's great, right? In addition to Field Yates. So we got all these draft analysts now that are involved in this process. It's not just me. So the enthusiasm comes for me to see these guys growing and developing in this industry and becoming stars. And here I am, the old guy, just hanging on and enjoying watching these guys thrive and prosper and do their thing and have opinions that maybe they look at things differently because they're a lot younger. I'm kind of old school. Some say a dinosaur, but I still have opinions. Like why I like Shedeur Sanders so much, because he's kind of traditional, old school, and doing it the way the Johnny Unitas did it right back in the day. So for me, as long as the enthusiasm's there, Jimmy, and the looking forward to the next draft and the next group of players, because they're all different. And that gets you excited. Love watching college football. Love the NFL. People say, what do you love more? I love my NFL Saturday. I love my college football Saturdays. I love my NFL Sundays. So what I do is on college Saturdays, it gets to be 2, 3 in the morning. Games are over. I flipped it in my mind to the NFL. So from that point, all Sunday, then it becomes all NFL. And then, because I love them both. I love college football. I love the NFL equal, and not one more than the other. Some can't believe that. They think you should love college more. And then people say, well, you should love it. I love them both the same.
That's the sport fan being deranged, because there's no reason why you can't love both.
Yeah,
So
but it seems like a lot of college football fans are a little jealous of the NFL because they think they're better. You don't have to keep saying it's great. We know college football is great.
Newsflash. Newsflash: the NFL's better than everything. Go look at the ratings of the money. Yeah, let's relax.
Yes, you're never catching it. Okay, you're never catching it. No matter how
sport
hard you may try, you're not.
Right,
It's the king of all sports. It's always going to be the king of all sports, and it's the NFL. And the NFL is exactly that. You are right, Joey. Nobody's catching it. It's going to be what it is.
And it's okay
years from now. And just don't try to fight it. Just try to be a good, solid second, which college football is. And be happy with that. So this notion that don't talk, college football is great. I think it could be better with some tweaks here and there. Same thing with the NFL, but that's just me. But we love.
Give me some tweaks. Give me some tweaks you'd want to make to the sport. I think
in terms of the NFL, it's just in terms of I get tired about protecting. I understand protecting players. But with the quarterbacks, and I said this, and I'm frustrated by the too high safeties. That was a big thing back in the ban. I didn't say ban. I said that was.
You said ban the too high safety.
I hate it. I can't say it. I'm at games where they're 35 yards off the line. How are you going to throw a deep pass? It's changed the game, and then so people took that as Kiper's crazy. But guess what? Aaron Rodgers spoke to it. You can't do that. You can't take those shots. You can't. It eliminates what I love, right? What we all love. So it was method to the madness when I said that, okay? And then you talk about all the different things going on in football with the quarter. I said put a flag on them. Have the option of grabbing the flag or hitting them. If you can't hit them and it's going to be a penalty, just grab the flag. Play stops. That's crazy, but that's what it's come to, because I always worry you get a great pass rush. Third down, you hit the quarter. It's automatic. Then so
that's a problem. That is a problem.
Or it's a touch foul in the secondary on 3rd and long. So there's certain things situationally, Jimmy, as a fan of the game, not just the Ravens, a fan of the game, that frustrate the hell out of me. These gift first downs. and keep them drive alive when they didn't earn it.
100%.
So there's a lot of things there, and we can get it. I have a lot of different tweaks I would do, but I've probably mentioned them to Roger at different points when we see each other at the draft along the way, and college football the same way. But you love what it is, and you can't make it perfect, and that's the thing.
Jimmy, if you could make one tweak to college, what would you make?
Well, we did the one thing. My one thing I screamed about for 40 years was, why are we going back? Not 40 years, because they changed it. It used to be they needed more plays in college football because it was 3 yards in a cloud of dust, right? With Woody Hayes and running the football, you don't throw because what can happen when you throw the ball? A lot of bad things can happen, right? So you run the football. So they needed to create more plays. The clock kept running. So they said, okay, let's stop it on first down. So it was like in 1968, right? They did it for a reason, to create more plays. Once we started throwing it all over the yard, games were going 3, and we were having 3:30 games. We were starting a show. Freddie Coleman and I did a show starting at 7:00 Saturday night. 7:15 games were still going on. Everything was overlapping. You missed the first quarter of a game because the other game was still in the fourth quarter, and then overtime rule was ridiculous too. Well, they had to change that. But to go to the whole thing with the first down, I said you can't stop the clock on a first down to move the chains. So they finally did that. Now the NFL was always concerned with TV and viewership. Smart, right? 3-hour windows, right? Then they moved the game to 4:25, 4:05, 4:25, right? Because they needed that window there, 4:25. So you got to have that ability. And you don't want to make it everything about the clock, but you certainly don't want games going 4 hours. And too many. So they're thrown all over the yard, stoppage after stoppage after stoppage. It was ridiculous. And too many plays. If you care about injury, these kids, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, are out there play after play after play. That leads to more injury, I believe. So if you care about that, you got to figure a way to dial it back. We need to create more plays. Now we don't. We got too many plays. So they finally did that after Jimmy, I screamed about that for 15, 20 years.
I'm glad they changed it too. You are 100% right on that. It needed to be changed. Let me ask you a couple things on this year's draft. Obviously, Cam Ward's going number 1. All indications there with the Titans. All anyone talks about is Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. The player who I cannot wait to watch on Sundays this year is Ashton Jeanty. Sounds like Raiders. Is there any chance it's not Raiders for him?
Well, you know my philosophy on running backs. You've probably heard that. People hate me on that. When they hated me on that for years, now they've jumped on the bandwagon about not taking a running back in the first round, right? So now it's, well, unless you're a playoff-ready team that just needs a running back, you don't do it. Well, the Raiders, are they playoff ready? In their minds, they want to be much improved. They couldn't run the ball last year. They brought in Geno Smith, Pete Carroll did, to reunite with Geno. So you take Ashton Jeanty if you're going to have that philosophy, right? Of we got to figure out a way to run the football. We got to take a running back. It's our number 1 need. Philosophically, I disagree, but I can understand from a value, from a rating standpoint, you got to do it. You don't draft on, you don't rank a player on philosophy. I don't rank running backs on my philosophy. I rank them on ability. And Ashton Jeanty.
Where do you have him ranked? I should know that. But
he's 4. He's been 4 all along. So he's way up. Marion Hampton from North Carolina is at 10. So I love those 2 backs. Now, philosophically, no, but I get why they're going to go. And to your point, he might be rookie of the year. Running backs, give him the ball and let him go as long as they can block. Let him go. He'll be great. Now, Marion Hampton, the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't know anything about anything, but I don't understand how I can't see that guy not being a great NFL pro, Jeanty.
He will be, because he's got the attitude. He's got the desire. He's got the talent. He's granite. He's got that low center of gravity where he's tough to find, tough to get good angles, tough to hit him, tough to find them, tough to locate them. And they always talk about contact balance. He defined what that is. Okay. Yeah. So for me, and I know Barry Sanders loves him. I heard Barry talking about him. A great kid, catches the ball, blocks, unselfish. Even Penn State, when they went over 100 yards in that game, and they knew that's who they had to stop. So then for the Raiders, it's always looked like the perfect fit. Marion Hampton, whether it's Dallas, whether it's Denver, he looks like he's going to be in that first round mix. And that's your 2 running backs. Those are the 2 guys I think deserve based on grade. Certainly Jeanty, and I think Marion Hampton does as well, coming out of North Carolina.
I'm going to make a statement, and you tell me if the statement has some validity or if it's completely ridiculous. A team may have an issue drafting Shedeur Sanders because they don't want to deal with the circus that is Deion Sanders.
Completely false.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why, Jimmy. Deion was a great teammate, not only a great player, one of greatest corner of all time, but a great teammate, a great worker, prepared as hard as anybody, worked as hard as anybody, practiced as hard as anybody. Players in the NFL that played with him loved him. He went to the Major League Baseball, and all the Atlanta Brave players in the organization loved him for the work. He didn't come there. He didn't bring any circus. Yeah,
but this is him as a father.
He knows you don't want to do. He knows there's none of that going on with Shedeur. Shedeur is going to
like you hear these things about like Shedeur going to Cleveland. Now, anytime a quarterback goes to Cleveland, it's a complete disaster. And then what is Deion going to chime in and complain about the organization, the talent? That kind of thing.
I don't think Deion would do any of that. I think Deion understands the game, how it's played, why it's what you need to be successful. Let Shedeur is going to create his own situation wherever he goes. He doesn't need Deion. And Deion hasn't said anything about he needs to go here, there, where. We don't know where Shedeur is going to go. And Travis Hunter, we know probably going number 2 to Cleveland the way it looks right now, who's a great player. Has been number 1 on my board since August, and that never changed. Shedeur's been a number 1 quarterback since August. That's never changed. But in terms of Shedeur, great kid. You talk about NFL conditions he's dealt with. To go to your point about Deion, it's not going to be any circus atmosphere coming with that. If anything, it's going to be anything but the opposite. It's going to be professionalism, work ethic, passion for the game, love of the game, doing it all the right way. Shedeur, after I didn't care about the pro day, but what he said afterwards when he was interviewed, Jimmy, about the receivers, they're running the routes. They're the ones out there doing the work. I had to make sure that they were coming back and they weren't getting worn out. The ball, I don't have to throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. I got to make it catchable for my receivers. Travis Hunter counting players on the field when he had played both ways in a game, still be mentally focused enough and into the game enough to be counting the players. So these two guys are special for a reason. Now, great players are great kids. So no, Shedeur. You can't do anything about your size.
I'm just throwing that out. I'm just throwing that out there based on what I saw from Deion the 2 years he was at Colorado.
Right. But I think myself for Shedeur, you can't do anything about your size. He is what it is. Right. You can't do anything about your 40 time. Everybody can predict that he's never going to know what it really is, but it's not 4.6. He can't do anything about his arm. His arm will get stronger once it's in the league. It's strong enough, but arms do get stronger. Peyton Manning showed that. Tom Brady showed it. Drew Brees showed it, and others have shown it. Your arm can get stronger. Josh Allen has proven you can get more accurate. That maybe will help Jalen Milroe, right? Maybe become more accurate throwing the football once he's in the NFL. But I think those two things have been proven by Josh. Accuracy, people say you can't get more accurate. Josh said you can. Can't get stronger. All those other quarterbacks said your arm can get stronger once you're in the league. So for Shedeur, I get it. He doesn't have the explosive arm. He doesn't have explosive legs running the ball. But what are they going to talk about, Jimmy? Decision-making, accuracy, toughness, coming through in the clutch, poise, consistency. He's got all that. So I'll go down swinging with Shedeur Sanders.
Have you ever had a player confront you about a negative analysis?
No, well, a lot of them work at ESPN now. But what you find is, Jimmy, the ones you praised and they didn't go quite as high, they say, well, you were too high on me. And the ones you didn't, they're never satisfied with where they were rated. They're competitors. So, nothing you can say or do is going to make anybody happy. I'll tell you what, I've never gotten a call saying thanks for the positive commentary. I've never gotten
a call. Have you ever gotten a call saying, why did you say that about me?
Never got a call either way. Good, bad, indifferent.
Okay, good.
No. All right. I never had a call from any. Now, agents at the back in the day weren't necessarily happy with what you said, but I didn't care much about that.
Agents are different than players.
Right. No, never got a player or anybody calling. No. I did have one parent call one time, I believe, back in the day that was upset about what I had said. That was it. One or two parents maybe, or brothers. Might have been along the way, but never the player himself had ever called me and spoken to me good or bad. Like said, hey, thanks for what you said, or what the heck's wrong with you? You're crazy. No, never had any of that. In
the parents who called, did their son go on to be a great NFL player or a bust in the NFL?
The one I remember the one, and the other one was a brother, but that was after he had been in the league. So no, the one was a disappointment, and the other was just okay. So no, but it was what it was. It's just family members defending the players, and it wasn't that many. Right. I mean, about thousands and thousands and thousands of players in 47 years. That was only two. I can only, and it might have been more. I can only remember two.
Yeah, I got it. Well, I appreciate you doing this. The NFL draft is Thursday, April 24th. You'll see Mel, obviously, ESPN. In doing some research for this, I was trying to look to see if you had like any other, see your other sort of podcast appearances. Unless Google is not working properly, it doesn't seem like you do a ton of podcasts. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
Inaccurate. We've done 2 a week.
I don't mean your own. I mean as a guest on others.
On a guest on others?
Yeah.
Not a ton. I would say not a ton of podcasts. No, I never want a lot of publicity. I never want to be doing a lot of that stuff.
Right.
I try to lay low. I've always tried to do that. I've never sought out any of that. So I've never tried to find people to say, hey, you need to get me. Now, whoever brought me on, they brought me on. A lot of them have been friends of mine, Jimmy, over the years. Say, I'm going to do Tim Kirkshin's podcast tomorrow. I'm doing a Raven podcast coming up in another minute. So I'll do podcasts for a lot of my friends in the business, whether it's, Dan Patrick. I just got a request from Dan. If I can find time for Dan, I'll do that. Skip Bayless, anybody out there in the industry that has a podcast, I will do that because they're friends of mine. But I never have gone out and said, hey, we're tried to become part of that industry. No, but I've done our First Draft podcast. We do all the time.
Yeah, that I know.
That we do. But no, other podcasts, Jimmy, no, I haven't done. I can't say I've done a ton of those. No.
Well, I appreciate you doing this one. I really do. It should have had you on many years ago. Not sure
I appreciate it, Jimmy. I've heard everything about you. Jimmy Traina, you kidding me? So I really appreciate it, pal.
Well, I appreciate that. And best of luck. I know it's a crazy busy time. So we'll be watching that opening round, first round, second round, third round, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, ESPN, Mel Kiper. Thanks, Mel. Appreciate it.
Nice, Jimmy. Now I know I've made it, Jimmy. Thank you, pal.